all early anthropologists, were up in Vancouver area studying the Quagga people, and there's like, well, what is this design? What is this element here? And he goes, and the elder who could only speak Quagga said, oh, that's blah blah blah. So they quickly write it down. Well, what does it mean? Only the artist knows for sure.
This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the Inland Northwest. I'm your host, E.J. Iannelli, and this episode is a little different. This was recorded on location at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture around the time that Raven and the Box of Daylight was being installed there. I sat down with Preston Singletary, who's the Seattle-based glass artist behind that exhibition, along with its curator, Miranda Belarde-Lewis. The three of us talked about Raven as a figure in tribal mythology, the universality of a good story, and the idea of art, and particularly Indigenous art, as a vehicle for information. Naturally, we get into the specifics of Preston's work and the exhibition itself, including its use of sound and lighting to create a multisensory experience. Before we dive into all of that, many thanks to our founding sponsor, Rogue Heart Media SPC, proudly rooted in Spokane and supporting our community with media that makes a difference. Find out more at rogueheart.media. And if you would like to support the podcast by becoming a sponsor yourself, reach out to us through our website at alaytpodcast.com. You also now have the option of supporting A Line Around Your Thoughts through Patreon. So check out our page on patreon.com/ALAYT. And now, off to the Mac. So welcome, Miranda, and welcome, Preston.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I have noticed with any coverage of this exhibition, whether it's print, whether it's video, whether it's audio, it always begins with the story of Raven and the Box of Daylight, and it kind of helps us set the stage or set the scene for this. Mm-hmm. So I know you probably have repeated it so many times, but if you could begin by telling us the story of Raven and the Box of Daylight.
Yeah, I see if I can distill it down to its essentials. So this is a story of Raven, who in the beginning of time, the world was in darkness, and he is traveling around and he encounters the fisherman of the night and asks, Raven is always, he's driven by hunger, and he's always commanding people to feed me. And he happens to ask them, where's the daylight? He's heard about this daylight. And then the fishermen of the night tell him of this old man at the head of the Nass River who has these objects in his clan house. So Raven travels to the Nass River. He meets the old man. He strikes up a conversation with him, asks him to come into the clan house. He's not allowed into the clan house because Raven has a bit of a reputation, being a conniving, and mischievous person, or individual, we'll say. And then, he's told by the fisherman of the night that the old man has a daughter who goes out to fetch water in the morning. And so Raven devises a plan to transform himself. And this is one of Raven's special powers. He can assume different forms. So he transforms into a speck of dirt, floats down this stream or this natural water stream, and the daughter scoops up the water. But because she's of a high-class family, she has, attendants or servants with her. And they want to protect her, so they're testing the purity of the water. They draw a feather through it. They notice the dirt, and they toss it off. And that's actually Raven that is getting tossed away. So he has to reformulate his plan. This time he decides to transform himself into a hemlock needle. So then he changes form, kind of deconstructs himself and turns into this hemlock needle. And the next day when she scoops up the water, she doesn't notice it. So she swallows the hemlock needle in the water, and nobody noticed it. And so she instantly realizes that, she says, I swallowed something. Well, she becomes pregnant, And so Raven is, inside of her and transforms into a human child. And so and it progresses rather quickly. Nobody questions, how did she become pregnant? But they were just more happy to have a new family member. So when the child is born, this is Raven in the form of a human child now. And so the old man, ecstatic to have a grandson, who is also precocious and mischievous, and he's always rooting around in the darkest corners of the clan house and is looking for the daylight. So the first box he encounters is the stars, and he takes this box and he's playing with it and carrying it with him for a while. And when no one's looking, he opens it up, takes the stars, throws the stars into the sky through the smoke hole in the clan house. In the clan house, there's always a central fire pit that's constantly, and in the winter months, it's constantly, burning wood. To people who traveled for long distances can warm themselves up. So the next box that he finds is the one that is the one that contains the moon. Mm. So then again, he's carrying it around with him, and he ends up opening it up, taking the moon, tossing it through the smoke hole in the clan house. And each time, the grandfather's more and more, angry with him and, reprimands him or punishes him. And so when it comes to the last and final box, it's like, oh, no, you can't have that one. So Raven bursts towards the box. He opens it up. He grabs the sun. He transforms back into a bird, into a white bird, which was Raven's original color. And so then he's trying to get away. He's flapping his wings. The old man realizes instantly he's been fooled. So he grabs the tail feathers of this raven who's flapping his wings, furiously to get away. And the men of the household, they gather pitch and they throw it onto the fire. And then this black smoke comes up and starts to turn Raven black. He finally gets away and he pushes his way through the smoke hole, and then he becomes a completely black bird from the soot and the smoke and all of this. And then he takes the sun and he places it in the sky, and the people in the world who had been living in darkness this whole time were startled, and some of them ran off into the forest, became the forest animals. Some of them jumped into the water, they became the sea life. Some of them jumped straight into the sky and they became the birds. And the people who stood there, either strong and proud became the Tlingit, or the ones who were dumbfounded and didn't know how to react became the human beings. So that's kind of the origin. In one way, it's sort of the origin of the clans. And so in this final room of the exhibition, you'll see these bust figures with all the different animal symbols that represent different families from the different realms.
And what point did you hear this story? Was it one that you heard as a child, and then you wanted to incorporate that later into your art?
It's one of the most well-known stories in the Tlingit culture, and there's other tribes that have similar versions of that story up and down the coast. And so, for me, I grew up fairly urbanized outside of the traditional Tlingit region. And so I grew up in Seattle, in a neighborhood in Seattle. So I had my great-grandmother and my grandmother, and my great-grandmother lived to be 100 years old. So we were around her quite a bit, the family gatherings and what have you. But I didn't, I was fairly focused on playing music. That was my goal. So when I started figuring out how to distinguish myself from other glass art, I started to reflect on my culture.
And you say that the various tribes up and down the coast have variations on this lore, but it's something that is almost universal, because you can find this, and I think when we've spoken earlier, you made the parallel between the Immaculate Conception of Christian theology and then even the tale of Genesis and bringing light to the world. I mean, here we have Raven who's bringing light to the world. So it's something that extends, it's almost pan-cultural.
Yeah, Yeah.
Well, and to answer your previous question, I grew up hearing the story and reading the story because it is one of the most well-documented Tlingit stories that we have. And so there's multitudes of children's books, some by Native authors, most of them are not. But my parents raised me in Zuni, New Mexico, and with my father's tribe. And so I was removed also from the Tlingit homelands. I grew up on my dad's homelands, but my mom always made sure that we knew which clan we are, we're Dukdingtan, knew who our family is, and took us back to Huna, took us to Excursion Inlet, took us to Juneau, where she grew up. And so that familiarity, even though I didn't get to grow up on Tlingit Ni or Tlingit land, I was very familiar with the story as well. And I think it's just a testament to how well known the story is outside of the Tlingit community, because it is it has those parallels to other theologies, to other ways of knowing, and different religions, but different cultures. And it's just the symbolism and the imagery of it is just so striking that it's a story that's very easy to like.
And that's one thing that I wanted to talk to you about specifically, and I know it maybe deviates a little bit from the exhibition, but I wondered if you have these dual cultures in your own background, one of which is kind of a desert people and one of which is a water people. Do you feel that dichotomy and that push and pull between these two almost polar opposites?
I feel like it's just adds to the balance of it all. Tlingit people are obsessed with balance. That's why we have two moieties. We have raven and eagle, and everybody in the nation is either raven or eagle. And that's whether you're born into it or you're born for the other. We also have a very structured potlatch system. And so adoptions of a non-Tlingit parent happen quite a bit. So make sure that the kids have a clan. And so Zuni Pueblo is a very, in Western terminology, a very traditional place. We just had our summer ceremonies last week. And so the language, the culture, the religion is very strong in Zuni. And to grow up in a place like that helps me see those elements in other cultures and other tribal communities, and to just appreciate, I think, having that dichotomy or those very opposite types of landscapes, water-based, desert-based, within our own family has just helped me to be more respectful of difference and to appreciate difference.
And I want to pick your brain about art as information, because I know that that's one thing that you've talked about in other interviews, and I find it kind of fascinating as a means of conveying cultural and ethnic information. But at present, I wanted to talk too about some of the pieces so that listeners understand what some of the pieces are in this exhibition, because it really does trace this narrative that you just recounted of moving from darkness into light and Raven's role in that. So if you could talk about some of these pieces that you've crafted out of glass and maybe some of your techniques.
Yeah, mostly I am a glass blower, but I work in a sculptural way, which is kind of out of the round, and so I'll superheat areas, and I'll grab and pull and cut and shape the form to render, like a bird shape, or in the beginning I was kind of I wanted to make traditional objects that looked like the traditional shapes, rattles and hats and baskets and that type of thing. So more of a representational approach.
And just to be clear, the early days were sort of late 80s, early 90s for you, is when you began incorporating some of these Tlingit themes into your work. Yeah.
And then over time, as my skills evolved, then I started to get more sculptural and, figure out different ways of, getting traditional forms, like in the form of the masks in the exhibition. You'll see these bust forms with look like a traditional mask, and so it generally gives me the contours and the proportions of a traditional mask. But then I can draw different designs onto it and elicit different looks for the pieces. I also do in the exhibition. There's some kiln formed pieces that are like the canoe, and the river itself is just glass panels that are laid out to symbolize a river. And then there's a lost wax casting process, which is the totem that you see as you enter the exhibit. That's the first thing that you see is this crystal totem pole that kind of has elements of the story. It has the raven and the sun, and has the the old man and the daughter and the boxes, and so. So it's tricks of the trade, I say.
But highly specialized tricks,
right?
Because the fact that you do take this neo-sculptural approach is pretty remarkable, because glass is obviously such a delicate medium. And the thing that fascinates me is that these stories are largely from an oral tradition, and so you're taking words and rendering them as objects. And so you've got these parallels to your own career, where you wanted to adopt a more representational art and take these objects that were in other physical media and then turn them into glass. But with this, it's the oral tradition. It is the words made manifest as glass, which is kind of, I'm sure that's occurred to you as well.
Yeah, that's, I worked with elders to talk about the stories, learn, about the design work. And one guy in particular, Walter Porter, was the guy that was an elder from Yakutat, and he broke these stories down into symbolism in a very Joseph Campbell kind of way. Mm. And he shared with me his observations, or his take on, breaking down the symbolism and attaching it to other modes of theology and mythology. And that was really, really eye-opening to me. So it was a way of like, well, how can I represent that in glass? How can you transcend the object itself and how it represents, part of the story or part of the symbolism? So that's what I was trying to get at with, some aspects of the exhibition.
And this is not, I say simply, and I don't mean to be too reductive, but this is not simply the glass objects, but illumination plays such a key role in the story, and it naturally plays a key role in the exhibition. And Miranda, I don't know if you wanted to talk about the illuminatory aspects of the exhibition, which I think were done, was it Zoe Juniper who was responsible for some of that, or in large part?
Yeah, Juniper, Zoe Juniper was their art company. And the man that we've been working with is Juniper Shui. Mm-hmm. And so Juniper really brought this dynamic aspect to the exhibition, both as the artist that he is working with projection, but also as the exhibition designer who was able to tailor every space, every venue that we've been to. And this is now the 7th venue. He has been able to tailor the exhibition to fit these very different exhibition areas that we've been in.
Oh, interesting. So he came out to Spokane and helped you set it up?
He's gone to every venue to help set it up. He's still here right now.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So if you could describe, and now we'll take the physical and turn it into words, could you describe the lighting component and projection component that's a part of this exhibition?
Well, glass lends itself to being lit up, right? And so the glass looks best when it is illuminated. And that's the same for all glass artists that I've seen. I don't think any glass artist wants it to be dimly lit, right? Which a lot of museums like to create this aura or a very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
Is it kind of reverential?
Yeah. Reverential, yes. And to have this sense of awe when you come in, and to have quiet tones and everything like that, where you just pay attention to the art, and glass is best paid attention to when it's well lit. Mm-hmm. And we intentionally, because the story is about starting off in darkness and then moving into a brightly lit area, you can't do that in a museum. You need people to be able to see where they're going. And with Juniper's help, we've been able to create a darker atmosphere at the beginning and then a brighter atmosphere and as you move through the exhibition and then get into the final room. And so to see the ways that we're able to call attention to the details of the glass, because Preston's process has been evolving for a few decades now. And so it is, it's necessary for us to call attention to the details in the glass, because then that becomes the illustration for the story itself. And so the use of light, the use of projection helps us to create this immersive environment that we want the visitors to feel like they're walking along with Raven through the story.
And Preston, you yourself have described this as multisensory, not just because of the physical objects and the illumination that's part of that, but also there's an auditory aspect to this as well. So do we hear Tlingit language?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, there's different speakers of Tlingit that are telling the Raven story, different aspects of the Raven story, and it's kind of random, but I wanted that the idea that the visitor wouldn't know exactly where they were, what this was all about, sort of challenge their perception of what was happening, and also transport them into another kind of dimension in a way. So I mean, I wouldn't say it was exactly Disneyland, but that was my fear that it might look that way, but really it does kind of as this videos as a backdrop, it does give this feeling of motion, a feel of breathing, something's moving there. And then how do you illustrate certain aspects of transformation? So there's one figure that we've got this very active sort of pattern. It looks like it's sort of rising up into this figure that's transforming into this humanoid raven human figure. So that was fun to sort of figure out those aspects, but also with the audio. And then I kind of collaborated with my musician friends, and we made these loops that would be, kind of set a different tone for each part of the exhibition.
So is your ideal visitor then someone who knows absolutely nothing about the Raven myth?
Well, it turns out that, yeah, I mean, it is well known, but a lot of people are probably learning about it for the first time.
Yeah, so then, they go through their own process of illumination as well.
Yep.
Yeah. And Miranda, what was your role as curator? I assume that Preston had a set number of pieces that were tailored to an exhibition like this. Now, what was your role as curator in kind of assembling those pieces and then presenting them?
When I joined the project, Preston already knew he wanted to do the Raven in the Box Daylight story. Mm-hmm. So I worked with different organizations in Alaska to find different versions of the story, because we knew from his previous work with Walter Porter that there was, who's an elder who was passed on. He's from Yakutat, and from the village of Yakutat. And we knew that there was many different versions of this one story. And so I found 5 different versions. We worked with some people who had actively translated a story that had been recorded in the Tlingit language. And then I also found transcriptions and translations of other stories. And so that's what you see as you walk through the exhibition is, I really like that word amalgamation that you used today, that it's an amalgamation of 5 different versions of the same story.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Told by 4 different storytellers. And so what you see as you go through is our version of what those 5 are. So the story that Preston told at the beginning of this podcast is the bones of the story.
Yeah.
But depending on if there is the storyteller was a male or a female, depending on if the storyteller was coastal Tlingit or an inland Tlingit, and depending on their relationship with Christianity, there might be more elements of that involved in the story itself. And so we took pieces from all of those. So sticking with the bones of the story, we incorporated details from all of these different versions of this one story.
And that ties in with your own specialty, because it seems to me that you're very interested in this palimpsest of oral tradition that is a mix of both mythology and actual history. And then how art in particular, and whether it's Preston's art or it's more tribal art, how that serves as a vehicle for that history. And so if you could talk about how this exhibition becomes that vehicle for that history.
Right. Well, we talk about day jobs and in our spare time. Right. So my day job is I'm an associate professor of information science at the University of Washington, and my research on the art side is I focus on how Native art conveys information and knowledge intertribally or intergenerationally within our own families, and cross-culturally when our art is consumed by anybody outside of our communities. And so I look at art, at Native art, Indigenous art, as information and knowledge ambassadors for our people. And it transcends time, because we can look at ancient Pueblo pottery and to see what types of knowledge are embedded within. So there's scientific knowledge with chemical reactions of pottery, clay, paint, pigment, the firing process itself. There's the symbolism of different Native communities. That is the imagery on it. There's the functionality. If it is a piece that has some kind of either spiritual or even economic function within the community. There's just so many layers to Native art and how it functions for us as Native people that I get really excited to see something like Preston's work, where you can look at it and see a raven with a sun in its beak and understand that that is a representation of the Raven in the Box of Daylight story.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you, Preston, about the way that this exhibition straddles both the specific and the universal. But Miranda, before I forget, I really want to talk about, form line plays such a integral role in your work, Preston. And I was curious if you see any maybe artistic cultural cross-pollination between Pueblo art and Tlingit art. Do you see any parallels between the two, or are they very, very distinct?
They're very distinct. The parallels I see is the function of the pieces themselves.
I see.
Yeah, and the design aesthetic is totally different. I guess the elements of the design are totally different. What I can see as a parallel is the graphic representation. Yeah. It's kind of like what some people would say would be an abstraction of a bird form. It doesn't look like a realistic or naturalistic expression of what a bird looks like. But if you know what you're looking at, right, if you can read the language of the design, then you can see very easily it's a bird. You can see it's a raven. Oh, and then we see that Preston snuck in an eagle into the tina, into the copper, right? You can see the differences. But when it comes to the way that they actually look, it's very different. Now, the collaborations that Preston does with other artists bring those together, like especially with Tammy Garcia, who's a Pueblo potter. You can see Tammy's aesthetic blended with glass, but that's different than seeing that cross-pollination of the design itself.
Mm-hmm. And form line really lends itself to capturing many layers within a particular piece. I don't know if you wanted to speak to form line, and it's one of those things that I find hard to describe. You know it when you see it,
right?
But yeah,
and I can spot a terrible design a mile away, but no, I had to learn quickly, because I started getting attention for what I was doing quite early. Maybe prematurely, but I went out of my way to find people who could teach me aspects of creating original designs, but using the architecture of the design system. So you have these sort of pod-like forms that, are always, the line is always thicker on the top and then thinner on the bottom. But if you look at a really good design, you'll see how these lines interconnect and flow and attach to one another with a very deliberate sort of style. And I always say that it's kind of like calligraphy in a lot of ways, where you learn the rules of the serifs and the thickness of the lines and stuff. And then over time, you might develop a personal style. So, we have tribal styles, from different tribes up and down the coast, from Vancouver on up into Alaskan territory, that it all looks kind of similar. You might say, oh, well, that's it, but it's distinctly different tribes. So when you get up to the Tlingit territory, the hallmark of the form line itself is that often the lines are much thicker and bolder and really basic. And when you go further south to the Haida, the Tsimshian, then the line weight becomes very, very thin, and it gets really, really busy, and it's elegant and it's beautiful, and it's related, but it's just different.
And this allows you to introduce a lot of different elements into a single piece. And so we will see visual representations of things beyond the object itself. And so it really gives you a lot of possibilities as an artist.
Yeah, often you can, hide little faces in details, and they may or may not have a significance. There's early anthropologists, were up in Vancouver area studying the Kwakiutl people, and there's like, well, what is this design? What is this element here? And he goes, and the elder who could only speak Kwakiutl said, oh, that's blah blah blah. So they quickly write it down. Well, what does it mean? Only the artist knows for sure.
Are there any Easter eggs that you snuck in?
All the time. Yeah, I put little ghost faces. Like sometimes when you see just lips and 2 eyes, that's a ghost figure. They don't have any outlines for the eyelids. So there's a lot of little things. Some other artists just call it filler.
Yeah.
So it goes all directions. Not every little element has a significance to it, but it does. See, that's the thing about form line is, when the people who have studied it, and there's a Latin term called horror vacui, which means fear of an unfilled space, right?
Yeah, so, horror's a vacuum, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you look at one of the hallmarks of Northwest Coast art, I think, is that you've got what is called a distributive design, which fills every aspect of the form itself. And then you have more configurative designs, which might look more anatomically like an animal, like a bird or a bear or, whatever. And so that's where the abstraction really comes in, because then you can really, you can be very liberal with how you construct designs, and it maybe just has one little, sort of foot that is there, and then it denotes what kind of animal it might be. But you would have to look at each individual design to sort of pick those things out.
And this segs well with your own penchant as an artist, and even your own evolution as an artist, because you started out, I would say, in a pretty strictly modernist vein, no? And then you began incorporating these, and we see this fusion of both modernism and traditionalism, and that's certainly evident in some of the pieces in this exhibition, probably with the boxes of daylight and the moon themselves.
Yeah, I started off as a glass blower, and made vases and bowls, and and I had a particular focus on decorative art of the 30s and 40s, sort of a modernist approach. Then I was exposed to the modernists who were inspired by oceanic art, native art, African art, even like such as Picasso, and was well known to have sort of appropriated some forms to reincorporate into his own art. And so that fascinated me, because even my great uncle, who was a pharmacist, but he was also a poet. He wrote poetry, and he was he pointed out to me this fact that that the modernists were inspired by this what they call primitive art, right? So And I had kind of a big question in my head, like, well, what is primitive art? And then talking about how the modernists were the one that really, there was Renard Strickland is a native scholar who wrote, it's ironic that the modernists forced us to look at the primitive, again, using that word, and appreciate differing levels of reality. So, so I started to look into inspiration from the modernists, like such as Noguchi and Henry Moore and, Max Ernst. I mean, all of this, and the surrealists, because they were embedding, this deep symbolism within their work. And so that's what I'm attempting to do with my work today, is to sort of use that symbolism and surprise people with it.
Yeah, and we have elements of the surreal in this. I mean, the very fact of a transmogrifying raven just the idea itself seems somewhat surreal. So it all seems of a piece to some extent.
Yeah.
And to add on to that point, there are trickster figures all around the world. Mm-hmm. And so that's another way that we are appealing to this, not a universal, but a widely known entity, like a trickster figure. And so for native trickster figures, we have raven, coyote, rabbit. There's different ones in North America, but we could look at Norse mythology, and look at Loki as a trickster, right? And he's known to be naughty. He's known to mess with things and be greedy. And a lot of times their actions are selfish, but end up affecting a whole group of people, not just themselves. And so then that idea of they can transform. And I really, my son, my oldest child was really into Marvel. Mm-hmm. And so seeing how Loki was able to be a person, then he was able to clone himself, have a hologram of himself and play with the physical parameters of reality is also something that we're hoping that resonates with folks looking at these examples within popular culture and also ancient culture.
Yeah, and that takes us really all the way back to the beginning of this interview when we started off with the story of Raven. And I said that it really seems that no matter what medium we're dealing with and that's talking about this, we begin with that story simply because I think there's a real human impulse or we're just suckers for once upon a time. It's something that transcends all cultures. We want to be entertained. We want to be told a story. We want to be sat down and say, even as far-fetched as it might be, this is the story of how things got to be the way they are. Mm-hmm. And so that when we talk about universality, I think that's a way that this exhibition really captures that because it tells us a once upon a time.
It tells us a once upon a time, and it also imparts different morals throughout the story. Mm. And so then the relationships between Raven or Yaeth, as his name is in Tlingit, Raven and his and the daughter who becomes his mom, Raven and Nashak Sankawu, who becomes his grandfather, and then Raven with this relationship to greed and want, and how that plays out is something that is, like you said, seen in many different types of stories from all around the globe. And so to play on those values and to see, to remind folks that even if they are removed from their own culture, everybody has a culture and everybody has ancestors, and those ancestors have stories that influenced how we think today. And to make that point, it's a very subtle point in the story, but we're trying to also encourage that through the intro text that folks will see when they come into the exhibition.
Yeah, and that emphasis on storytelling ties into Sleeping Beauty, which is one of the things that I definitely wanted to touch on, because here, this exhibition has been touring for a few years, mm-hmm. and when we think of visual art, we certainly think of the museum space, the exhibition space. But with the Pacific Northwest Ballet and Sleeping Beauty, your work came out of the exhibition space and came out of the museum and was on stage. And it lent itself once again to storytelling. Mm-hmm. If you could talk about that experience, and I'm also curious as to whether or not this is the start of something Are we going to see more Preston Singletary dramatic productions?
Well, the phone isn't ringing off the hook, but I would welcome the opportunity because it was fun, based on my interest as a, performing artist, that I've always dreamed about doing, a theatrical performance based around Native culture or Tlingit culture. But that was an unexpected invitation that just popped up, and I met Peter Bowl, the artistic director of PNB, and he just said, "Hey, have you ever thought about designing for the ballet?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Well, would you like to?" And I said, "Sure." He foolhardily. I didn't know really what I was getting into, but I would say that it was very much of a collaborative endeavor. I mean, I don't know what it takes to make a successful ballet set in the first place. And so we wanted to take it out of an old European setting and place it, again, not transport it into an Alaskan Native village per se, but we wanted so we chose kind of outside in nature, and then it all kind of fell together. He had basically a running checklist of things that he wanted to incorporate based on the work that he had seen of mine, and had it sort of bookmarked and said, we have to have some baskets. We have to have, I came up with the idea of this big, eagle in the center of the stage, and then all of this scrim has to drop down and obscure it and change the scenery and all this stuff. So, of course, I know nothing about painting trees and what have you. So it was really like everybody kind of, I felt more like a design director, so to speak, or adjunct creative director. So I would brainstorm with, the art group and the painters and the set makers and the prop builders and all of that. And we just figured it all out. So some stuff was really hands-on. Some stuff was just kind of left to chance, but it was, it all came together very, with a big impact, I think. And I think people, the biggest question I got from every person who was part of the media was like, well, what does this have to do with Native culture, ballet? Yeah. What is it? And I was like, okay, well, it's, this is a fairy tale. Okay. It's a mythology. There's a moral to the story, there's always, so was how I related to it. It was just a Tlingit love story or whatever, and so in the end,
it's
love
a once
conquers
upon a
all.
time.
Exactly.
It's another once upon a time.
So, that's how I approached the whole thing. There was a little friction with, one individual, I will say, but I'll leave it at that. And they just didn't see the logic in, this is the oddest, collaborative team I've ever worked with. And, she wouldn't say, she would stop short of saying, you're just an interloper here. You have no experience. You don't know what you're doing, But I think that was what this person wanted to say.
Yeah, but I think it speaks to your distinctive visual style and the one that you have crafted, that I don't know of any other ballet production that had this aesthetic. I mean, Immediately I was struck by it, and I can't imagine that anyone else wouldn't be. And again, we don't have to like everything that falls under the umbrella of art. Art can be polarizing, and that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. No, but it was funny because the question came up over and over, and I just had my stock answer, and it was, and it fit. And I think that people, in the end, there was more unsolicited, comments that, were favorable than any kind of, questioning or criticism about it. So I was like, in my mind, that was all a success, huge success. So, again, it was a moment that was, it was like a flash in the pan for me. But it is something that they invested, all of the sets and all the costumes and all this stuff, and they don't do it every year. So it takes several years to build up a production like that from every aspect. And so they'll probably roll it out again in, 2 or 3 years, and it'll cycle through their schedule.
And lastly, we have this nationally touring exhibition. We have the Pacific Northwest Ballet production of Sleeping Beauty. And then you're also doing smaller, more public art. And that is Petrel guards the water, Raven steals the water. This is something that a new installation in Seattle, if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
right. Yeah. So it's on the ship canal in Fremont, separates Fremont and Queen Anne Hill. And this was one that popped up several years ago, and we thought it was going to be up. We were going to be installing like 3 years ago. Or 2 years ago. I said, that's great. It will be installing by the time I'm 60, and now I'm almost 62. So it was, but it was, sort of a water runoff, the storm water that redirects the storm water to a water processing plant over in Discovery Park in Magnolia. So this was something that, automatically, the purity of the water, so this is a story of Petrel, who was guarding this natural spring of water, and Raven comes to visit and says, and in all these Raven stories, there's like, hey, fella, how you doing? It's kind of like using language like that, and hey brother, you can't be here. I don't want you around. He's guarding his spring water. So he, Raven just kind of rambles on and whiles away the hours, and the sun goes down, and he says, hey, I'm just going to sleep here tonight. I'll take off in the morning. And so Raven says, you sleep over there. So they all fall asleep. Raven wakes up in the middle of the night, takes dog feces, and he smears it on Petrel's behind. And, the daybreak comes, and he's like, hey, brother, you soiled yourself in the middle of the night. And so Petrel's, he's embarrassed, and he flies off to go clean himself. Raven swallows up that entire natural spring, and he's engorged with water, and he starts to fly through the across the land up in the sky, and the water's dribbling out of his mouth, and it's creating the rivers and the streams. So that's why, kind of, in the best instance, there's some idea of a story based on the brief that you get, with the stakeholders, and the fact that this was part of the art that was around this water filtration system or diversion system. It's like, well, that fits. So we put that piece up.
And again, the story really lends itself to that.
Yeah.
It does. And there's also, in our research of all these different Raven stories, we are constantly reminded that there are dozens of Raven stories of how Raven shaped the land, created the rivers and the streams, created different islands, like created the Aleutian chain. There's so many stories about Raven shaping the land. And our most well-known story is Raven shaping the cosmos, shaping, releasing the stars, the moon, and the sun. Mm-hmm. But there are so many Raven stories. And so for us in our research, to be constantly reminded of there's all of these different ways that Raven has impacted the world as we know it now. And to be able to, for Preston to be able to make art that reflects that is what I hope for the future of Raven stories themselves, is that there's more and more art that reflects the different stories. We have a lot of art about Raven and the Box of Daylight, not just Preston, but many other artists, because it is such a well-known story. And so now that we're learning about them, documenting them, and different tribal organizations like Sealaska Heritage Institute will be releasing a book, a compilation of different Raven stories. We're hoping to see, and I'm selfishly hoping to see, many different artists that pick up these different Raven stories and make art that reflects them, because it's just so rich, a resource.
Yeah, so hopefully, Raven Steals the Water and Raven and the Box of Daylight is just the first of many to come. Well, I was going to thank you, but we're going to save that because there's a coda to this podcast, and that is the lightning round. And so these are semi-related questions, and they allow us to go slightly off topic. So we're going to start the lightning round. The first is a simple either-or question. Texting or calling?
Texting.
Texting? Okay, you like the short form?
I do like rapid fire.
Okay. Preston, what about you? Texting or calling?
I guess I resolved myself to texting because I always try to call, and that's so old school now.
The spot that you go to feel at home, because Preston, you're originally from San Francisco and then you moved up to Seattle. So is one of those more home than the other?
No, I was before I was even a month old, we were moving back to Seattle. So my Seattle parents moved to San Francisco. I was born and they moved right back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I've lived almost my entire life in Seattle, save for 3 months in Alaska when I was a teenager, and then 6 months in Stockholm when I was courting my wife. Other than that, my mailing address has always been in Seattle. So if there's better places to live, I wouldn't know because I've not tried living there.
And when you go back, do you feel this is home?
Yeah, I definitely feel like Seattle is home.
Miranda, what about you?
Shiwina, Zuni Pueblo.
And can you identify that kind of geographically? Like where exactly is that?
It's 35 miles south of Gallup, New Mexico. So on the I-40 interstate, it's just south of Gallup, which is very close to the New Mexico-Arizona line.
Mm-hmm. And so you go there, drink in the air, and you feel as though you're at home.
Yeah, I was born and raised there, and so it's forever going to be home.
Oh, fantastic. The biggest adventure that you've ever been on? So was there a super exciting road trip or maybe a trip to Japan or a trip to Europe?
The biggest adventure I've had by myself has been to Venice.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to Venice, Italy twice in a year because of the Biennale. And when Jeffrey Gibson was the U.S. representative in the U.S. pavilion, I had the opportunity to go twice. Once as an educator, I was guest faculty for IAIA, the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. So I was guest faculty for their MFA program, and I got to do everything with the students and with their regular faculty. And then I got invited to the symposium, the closing symposium for Jeffrey's exhibition, and so I presented at that one as an academic. And so that was like for my solo self, like that was the biggest adventure because I traveled by myself to Europe, and that was the first time I had traveled by myself to Europe.
And were you taken with the city?
Yes.
Yeah.
It just looked so fake. I kept thinking that pretty soon I was going to turn around this corner of this cobblestone road, which I kept calling like an alley, right? It's not an alley, it's a road. That is the road. You are the vehicle on the road. And I just kept thinking it was going to end. Like pretty soon I'll be back in the quote unquote real world. And it wasn't. It just kept going around. It just kept on going and going and going. And the city itself to be built out of water, like that just was incredible to me. And to have the privilege of being there to celebrate a Native artist on a global stage was just phenomenal.
And it is kind of an art appreciator's paradise because it's not just the visual art, but it's also the architecture as well. So it really does, yeah.
Yes, and of one of just human innovation.
Yeah.
You know, of how do you build a city on a lake? And then to find out it's like, oh, the rich people wanted to be away from war.
Yeah.
So they built themselves this little paradise, and now they're complaining that there's too many people that want to come check out this really cool place. But that's my biggest adventure.
Yeah, and unfortunately also a lesson in man's inability to tame the elements because despite our best efforts, the city is sinking and will eventually be swallowed. So, yeah.
Swallowed by water or swallowed by mold because there's a ton of mold there. And half of us had allergic reactions while we were there. So that was a kind of a reality check too. It's like, it sounds great. Yeah, let's have this city on water. But, oh, look at mold grows when you build a city on water.
And Preston, what about you?
Well, I guess, the greatest adventure, I suppose, would have to be going to Sweden, on a work trip, and then meeting my wife there. This was 33 years ago. And we've been married for 30. So that, if there was a second home, I guess it would be Stockholm in particular, because it's an amazing city, and I know it well now. I've always loved going to Asian countries, though. I've been to Japan several times, and I find it. Well, once you get past the veneer of what the charm of being there, and then you realize you're really just visiting, But I studied Aikido for a time, and so I felt like I was another reason I could relate to it. And as well, Thailand one time I went. It was kind of a guided trip in a van visiting different parts of Thailand, but that was really beautiful too. So somehow I have an affinity to Asian countries, but there's always Stockholm.
And any chance that some of the art from those Asian countries or some of the styles and whatnot might infiltrate your work in the future?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, because I'm also as much Tlingit, I'm also Filipino. Mm-hmm. So I've often wondered how to blend that or explore that. But I found that the Alaskan side speaks much louder to me, because the close proximity to it. So I always like to feel as though this, kind of a genetic memory that, is awakened. And that's what, when I placed myself on this path, it opened up so many more perceptions and opportunities too. I guess I've tried to honor the culture by, the work that I do in it, and it's really shown me a lot, introduced me to a lot of people, and just incredible stories that just keep going.
Yeah, we have some of the Tlingit narration in this exhibition, so maybe we can look forward to an exhibition with some Tagalog in it. And
yeah. I do have some glass friends and artists that I know who that are doing interesting things, with glass and just as Filipino artists, and so just have to see, it's just not enough hours in every day to do everything I want to do.
You could put some tattoo designs on the glass. That would be cool.
I've always been fascinated with the whole, there's this book that was published called The Land of the Headhunters, and the ancient Filipino culture where, they're shrunken heads and stuff like that. And that kind of like energy kind of fascinates me, but I don't know. They've been so Catholicized too, and they incorporate so much. But they have just as many mythologies, ancient Filipino mythologies, as the Tlingit do, I believe. So, we'll see.
Future work, yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, we've talked a lot about storytelling today, and so I was wondering if you had a favorite Native or Indigenous story.
Besides this one?
Besides this one, yeah.
Well, in Zuni, so we talk about symbolism, about different things. So in Zuni, we also have a flood story. And we have a mesa that it sits on the eastern side of the pueblo. Mm-hmm. And so that mountain is called Tawayalani, or Corn Mountain. And it's my favorite mountain. And it's a flat top, right? But in there, because of the way that the ocean used to be over the Southwest, what is now the Southwest United States, you can see the lines from when the water receded.
Yeah.
And so you can see that striation on the mesa, and it's different colors. And there's two pillars that are part of the mountain. And so for us, when we, in a very similar way to the way it's told in the Bible, we were not honoring our values, our ways of living. And so we were punished through a flood. And a flood came and we had to live on top of the mesa.
Oh, interesting.
And one of the ways that our spiritual leaders learned through divine instruction that they had to make a sacrifice. And so the main spiritual leader dressed his children, his son and his daughter, in their finest regalia, and loaded a woven basket full of prayer sticks that are cottonwood sticks that have different feathers tied onto them to represent the different directions. And so there was prayer sticks, there was food, there was different types of offerings that were in the baskets that were carried by the children into the water. Anybody that had tried to go into the water was they couldn't, because there was a plumed serpent. There was a black serpent with feathers on its head, so a plumed serpent that would circle the waters. And our name for him is Kolowasi. Some of the pueblos along the river call him Avenue. But there's this snake that is in different pottery designs from the different 19 pueblos. Like, we all have a relationship with this plumed serpent that was in the water when we were during the flood time. And so our name for him is Kolowasi. And Kolowasi would circle the waters, and we couldn't get down into the water. And so when the son and the daughter were sent down into the water with this huge basket of offerings, that appeased Kolowasi, and the water started to recede. And so you can see the levels of the water on the mesa itself physically right now. And when the water receded, the son and the daughter were immortalized through these two pillars. And so I like to tell that story to my kids as we're walking by the mesa or driving by it, because there's a road that goes around it. And I try to time it so that way when I tell them, the brother and the sister, we can see them forever now in these two pillars that are right here. And then we turn the corner and there's the pillars on the mountain, and they can see the lines from the water going down. And that's my other favorite story.
Oh, that's fantastic. And again, so many universal themes in that, the sacrifice, the flood, the punitive nature of the flood. Yeah, It's really cool. Preston?
Well, I'm going to cheat and say that the stories that I might find my favorite have yet to be kind of quantified. And it's based on some of the work that I'm doing, I guess, trying to, make sense of what the world is going through now. And Raven potentially is, battling climate change. He's, protecting the missing and murdered Indigenous women. He's discovered the residential school graves, and he's also, he's sick and tired of all the gossip and chatter, that exists in the world. In Tlingit culture, there was homicide wasn't maybe the most heinous act. It was actually what was even considered worse was gossip, because gossip, creates instability within the community. And so if someone, and in the old days, if someone's clan member wronged the other clan member, a different clan member, this entire clan member over here, who was related to the aggressor, would stand up and offer an apology to that community or that clan, and they would be paid restitution and say, from this day forward, we won't speak of this. We take responsibility for what our clan member did. And so imagine if we lived in that kind of a world, internationally, where the things that have been done to other countries, and people standing up and taking responsibility for their actions, it could be a completely different world that we live in. So.
I hear a call for integrity and accountability, but also kind of the need for new stories and restoring some of the magic back into modern life.
Exactly, because I feel like most of the contemporary issues, can be mythologized, and Raven can have a role in them in terms of how, and he's again speaking in metaphor to like the idea of a solution, or bringing an awareness to a problem that maybe isn't being addressed, and so there's a bit of social and political commentary that can be embedded into this idea of making new Raven stories. And I think that that's how stories might have been created, in the past, based on something that happened, and then they would build a story around. Well, Raven did this, Raven did that. So so he's having conversations with landowners, and they're talking about like, well, yeah, I hear there's a heat wave in the ocean that's killing all the snow crabs. And it's like, yeah, well, only a white man can claim that, that there's a heat wave in the ocean. So this dialogue, it kind of goes on and on. Anyway, that's my that's my little non sequitur there.
Oh no, I think it's perfectly relevant. Far from a non sequitur. I think it's we need Raven back.
Yep.
Preston and Miranda, thank you so much for coming in today and chatting about the exhibition, the mythologies, just everything. It's hugely appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been A Line Around Your Thoughts. My name is E.J. Iannelli, and my guests were the glass artist Preston Singletary and the independent curator Miranda Belarde-Lewis. You can catch Preston's exhibition, Raven and the Box of Daylight, at the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture until January 4th, 2026. Until then, northwestmuseum.org has opening times and more details. As ever, a heartfelt thanks to our founding sponsor, Rogue Heart Media SPC, proudly rooted in Spokane and supporting our community with media that makes a difference. For more, visit rogueheart.media. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor and keeping these conversations going, you can reach out to us via our website at alaytpodcast.com. We are also now on Patreon, so head to patreon.com/alayt to become a supporter there. You can also get updates and engage with us on Mastodon at alaytpodcast@pnw.zone, on Blue Sky at alayt.bsky.social, and Instagram at alayt_podcast. Until next week.